to order the January 27th work schedule, which is still being conducted remotely due to the state of emergency. All planning board members are still participating remotely. We'll now ask our acting planning director, Chris Murphy, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. George Bryant.
Here.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Here.
Walter Farabee.
Here.
Jason Grubbs.
Here.
Clarence Lamb.
Here.
Chris Leak.
Here.
Mo McCray.
Here.
Brenda Smith.
She's here. She went to get things off of the printer.
All right. And then Jack Stillman, I think, will hopefully be along in a few minutes, but he is not here currently.
All right. All right. Well, I am now going to turn this part of the meeting over to Chris Murphy, acting planning director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on the agenda today is a report dealing with a work program item that was on our work program from last year that got carried over to this year, dealing with minor subdivisions and some potential changes to those requirements. And David Reed has prepared a report for the planning board, and I'm going to turn it over to David to have him go over kind of the facts behind our findings. And this is an item that the planning board will need to take an action on as far as accepting the report and then perhaps amending the work program, or basically saying that the item has satisfied the work program deliverable. So with that, I'll turn it over to David.
All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'd like to go over, as Chris said, to explain why we put an item on the work program and later decided it was probably not necessary. And I'd like to kind of start by going over a little bit of the history of the minor subdivision. We have two types of subdivision. The major subdivisions are where they build and dedicate public roads, and those are the ones that you see at your monthly meetings. And then we have the minor subdivisions, which are approved by staff. They've always been a staff level review. And when I started here, we stamped deeds approved. We would review minor subdivisions by comparing the deed to the survey it was created from. And then we would make sure it met all our regulations. And at that time, a deed approval cost $5. So times have changed a little bit. But we started requiring the minors be platted in 2007, and then they started coming in electronically and being reviewed electronically in the late teens. We work very closely with the Interdepartmental Site Plan Review Committee. We actually chair that committee, and they're the ones who look at all your plans that you see every month. They review all the plans, special use zoning, site plans, subdivisions, PBRs. And we're real close with a lot of the staff members in those departments. Some of those staff members voiced some concerns that our subdivision regulations, minor subdivisions in particular, were not necessarily addressing all of the regulations they enforce. And so we decided to have some meetings with them to see what their concerns were. And at that time, we thought that might lead to a text amendment to address their concerns. In many cases, we found out that all we really needed to do was to add them to the review cycle. And since we already had them as reviewers on the major projects, all we had to do is click on their name and they became a reviewer. That took care of a lot of their concerns. They could communicate their regulations to customers. And we also developed some notes they could place on plats when necessary. So that took care of a lot of that. While we were having these discussions with the interdepartmental staff, we also reached out to the development community because at one point we thought this might go in a direction where we require all minor subdivisions be located on public streets. When we talked to folks in the development community, they had some concerns about making their development projects more expensive, and especially small infill projects. If you have to dedicate public right of way, it's much wider than an access easement. It's much more expensive. And they end up having to try and build a product in a neighborhood that was probably more expensive than the neighborhood they were trying to do infill in. And we thought those were valid concerns. So at the same time, while we were going through all these meetings and talking to these folks, there were some other changes going on. One was that we adopted the cottage courts, and that put another tool in the toolbox for us to do infill development in a creative way. And North Carolina General Statute 160D was adopted. And one thing that did was to create a lot of minor subdivisions that are able to be approved without any local review. They're exempt from our review. So that kind of took a lot of changing our review requirements off the table because so many minor subdivisions don't even require our review. So with all of that, we determined that there really was no need to pursue changes to the minor subdivision regulations. And that's why we're recommending we not go forward with a text amendment. So I'd be happy to try and answer any questions you have.
Yes, David,
Yes.
could you start by defining what a minor subdivision is in terms of how big a piece of land and what would qualify for a minor subdivision?
Well, it basically is any subdivision that does not involve the dedication of public right of way. And so it could be any number of lots cut out of a parent tract if they front on an existing public road. And then there's a limit to the number you can cut that are served by a private access easement. So how we've interpreted this is that when we adopted the subregs in 1985, we have maps from that time and we call those the parent tracts. If you have a large tract of land, but it's not fronting on a public road, we count how many times you've cut that, and then your limit was 3. And that was true up until 160D was adopted. And now you can further cut that property by any review. So the definition is really any subdivision of land that can meet our requirements and does not involve the dedication of public right of way.
Okay. Yeah, that's not what I was thinking. So I'm glad you cleared that up. But one other question I had, David, was you were talking about, for example, in your report about the concerns that stormwater reviewers had. And you said that by adding them to the review process that addressed their concerns about communicating to the petitioner or to the user what the issues were. Could you explain what some of their concerns were and how they could be fixed by adding them to the review process?
Right. Well, basically what this catches is if someone goes in and cuts one lot off and they don't disturb enough ground to require an erosion control permit, stormwater doesn't see that. But if we send them the minor subdivisions and they see that one lot is cut off and then another lot is cut off and a third one, and they hit that threshold, and it's the same developer, then they can impose these regulations. And they're one of the departments we created a stamp for to put on the plats that puts people on notice that this would, this may trigger stormwater review.
I see. Okay, great. Thanks.
Are there any other questions, comments? All right, so board action is required on this.
Mr. Chairman, this
Make
is,
a motion.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that we remove this item from our work program.
Second.
Motion by Mr. Lamb, second by Mr. Grubbs. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Sir, let me get my papers shuffled around here. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yeah.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Hey, sorry I'm late. Yes.
Thank you, sir. And I have you marked down as attending during the first item, so you are fine. Mr. Chairman of the Board, that brings us to the second item on today's agenda, and for that, we'll turn to Tiffany White, who will give you an overview of a text amendment that will be coming to you at your February 10th meeting. This is a text amendment that we have worked with the city attorney's office on the item, and it's in relation to Senate Bill 300, which was approved sometime back in the summer to fall, that basically said that for zoning violations, You cannot have criminal, you can't seek criminal charges for a zoning violation. You can only seek civil penalties. And I will be here to answer any questions related to how we've used those provisions in the past. I can say that in my tenure, whenever I left planning and went to inspections, and then since we've had the merger, we have never used the criminal penalties for zoning violations. So we weren't necessarily in any hurry to get these out since we don't use them, but this is cleaning up our ordinance to make it consistent with the requirements of the statutes. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tiffany, who can go over kind of the nuts and bolts of the amendment.
Thanks, Chris. Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the board. I hope that I have sharing abilities here. You were sent this draft ordinance as part of your packet for this meeting. As Chris mentioned, we are looking to modify certain sections of the UDO to comply with the changes that SB 300, specifically Part 8 of SB 300, put in place for decriminalization of the ordinances. So basically this impacts sections 10.2.1 and 10.2.2 for the Winston-Salem and Forsyth County areas, again, decriminalizing penalties for violating certain provisions of the ordinance. I will say that the Senate bill itself outlined certain specific areas that needed to be decriminalized or must be decriminalized. And so we went through and reviewed all of the sections of the UDO to make sure that those sections were in compliance. And one of the major sections was that anything pursuant to 160D had to be decriminalized. And as you know, 160D had a lot of changes that we had to update for the UDO. So staff did review that pretty closely. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. It was a pretty small change there, a draft change. And we did review this with the city and county attorney's offices. And so it appears that those are the sections that will need to be modified to comply with SB 300. So pretty straightforward, but I'm here to answer any questions if you need.
Are there any, thank you, Ms. White. Are there any questions for Ms. White or comments?
I just had a question for Chris about how these penalties get imposed. So in the ordinance language, it says it's $100 civil penalty. How does that work? I mean, I don't quite understand what gets assessed that.
It's one of those things where, you know, we have some leeway and discretion whenever we send out a notice of violation related to, let's say someone is operating an illegal car repair business at their residence or something, and we send them a notice. In that notice, we'll give them a specified period of time to bring their project into compliance. Normally, I think it used to be 10 days. I think we've actually revised that down to 5. But then what happens is if they choose to ignore it and we go back out and see that they haven't taken corrective action, what we do is we assess them a $100 civil penalty. And in that civil penalty, it says, you know, this is your $100 fine for not complying. Every day thereafter is a separate offense. And then on the 30th day, we go back and see if they've brought the project into compliance. And if they haven't, then we send them a letter basically totaling it up to $3,000, turn it over to the city attorney's office, and then they pursue action in court. You know, they'll try to get it calendared. They'll take the item before the judge. And, you know, if it's actually a case, you know, both sides will present the case. And, you know, normally what happens is the judge will issue an order to the property owner, essentially giving them a specified period of time to bring it into compliance. And if they don't, then normally with that order, there is an abatement provision where the city can go in and take corrective action. All that being said, what we normally do is if we send that initial notice of violation and someone contacts us and we talk to them and they say, well, 5 days, I can't really bring in compliance that quick, but can you work with me? Can you give me, I think I can have it done in 3 weeks. Then, we work with them. And as long as they're continuing to work with us, we'll work with them. At the end of the day, we don't want to collect money. We want things to be brought into compliance. So that's kind of how that process works. Like I said, the criminal penalties haven't been used in a long time, and they've only been used a couple times, and that was with some repeat offenders, with some fairly egregious violations. And like I said, in my 15 years, they haven't been used. I want to say it's probably been closer to 25 since they've been used. But the civil penalties, that's how that works when we're doing an enforcement action.
Thanks.
Chris, does that work, Chris? I mean, does it seem to get effect?
Generally speaking, it does. Of course, you always have those outliers that just either ignore or don't think we're going to do anything. And those are the ones that get taken to court. And then whenever they get an order from the judge, generally speaking, they go ahead and bring it into compliance. But we have had instances where we've had to bring in community development because they have an abatement team to remove things to bring the site into compliance. But I would say in a majority of the cases, they bring it into compliance, or we find some way to work with them. If it's a component of something is out of compliance, but the rest of the business, like I said, there are ways that we can work through things to bring them into compliance. Some things just got to go away because it's not allowed.
Yeah. So let me ask a question across. Historic Resource Commission has a similar type of fine, I guess. Is that $75 a day?
No, well, basically, whenever something's not in compliance with HRC, like someone did work and didn't get a COA, Heather and Michelle and the HRC staff turn it over to our zoning field staff, and they're following the procedures I just went over.
Okay, so it would be $100.
Correct.
And then community development, is it the same for them? They go back to you, or do they have a separate?
Well, no, community development is totally separate because that's dealing with minimum housing and those kind of things. If they have minimum housing violations, that's outside of our purview. They have their provisions in the city code. But whenever I brought up community development, because we don't have an abatement team, whereas they have crews that go out and do, remove junk and trash and those kind of things. They have crews that go out and do mowing. So we generally use their crews to do the abatement. And the way that works is that if the city crew goes out and does the abatement, then they will put a lien on the property, a sanitation lien based on the cost of the work that is done.
Okay, thank you. That answered everything.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments on item 2? All right, thank you. There is no board action required on that, so we'll move on to item 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Item 3, I'm going to turn it over to Kirk, who's going to go over our update of the 2021-2022 work program. This is our typical mid-year update, kind of to give you an update of where we are on projects, what we've completed, what's outstanding, and just kind of a general status. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kirk.
Thank you, Chris, and good afternoon, board members. Just a brief technical question for Brian. Brian, I'm pressing the share screen button and it says only the host can share in this meeting. All right, I've been assigned as co-host, and let's go ahead and fix this. Tell you what, hang on just a moment. I'm having a little bit of a technical problem. Brian, I don't know if you could pull up the email with the agenda items that were sent out with the work program in it.
Bear with me.
I appreciate it, sir. While he's doing that, as we do every year at this time, we're going to be going over a mid-year work program item. Thank you. And really, there's only a few items that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention at this point. And then certainly if there's any questions that you all have, we can talk about those things as well. But, and maybe if we could just zoom in just a touch there. Perfect. Thank you. So the first item that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is the comprehensive plan update. Obviously, when we presented the work program to you all last summer, we were expecting that we would have some substantial movement on the work program at this point. Our goal was to talk about process development, contact with stakeholders, and preparation for public meetings in the coming summer. Unfortunately, as Aaron became the assistant city manager and basically we really didn't know what was going to happen in terms of who would be the planning director, and that's still open in perpetuity. We wanted to leave that open so that whoever the planning director ultimately was, that person would be kind of brought on from the beginning of the comp plan process. Certainly, we did some staff research on best management practices in peer communities last year, and that's probably still fairly relevant. So once a planning director is announced, whenever the board makes that decision, we'll be able to jump on this fairly quickly. And I'll also say that since we weren't expecting some of the COVID uptick with the Omicron variant this fall and winter, I think it's actually been fortuitous just to make sure that we have that adequate public involvement. The next item, if we can scroll down just a little bit on the page, is the downtown streetscape master plan implementation. This is something that Amy Crum has been working on, and she has actually been working with engineering to revise the city's infrastructure standards. We were originally thinking that this would be a text amendment because it's most of the things that we deal with are development standards in the form of text amendments. But when we got to looking at it with our interdepartmental team that David was talking about, we realized that these standards are all within the public right of way. We're talking about things like benches and tree grates and things of that nature. So the infrastructure standards is the better place for that to go. And Amy's nearly complete with that, and we're expected to get that adopted in the first quarter of this year. If we could scroll down to the next page. The next item I want to talk about is the new Walkertown Road Corridor Plan. That's an item that was actually in our previous fiscal year's work program, and we didn't work on it at that time because of COVID and recognizing that that area of the community is one that's more strongly affected by the digital divide. Folks in that side of the community don't have as much access to high-speed broadband and things of that nature. So we wanted to make sure that we provided adequate opportunities for safe in-person meetings. We were hoping that that opportunity would have availed itself this winter. Again, as I mentioned with the comp plan, we didn't anticipate the rise of Omicron, and we're still under advisement to hold off on this until we can actually have safe in-person meetings that can make sure that folks without technology access can participate in this process for New Walkertown Road. If we could go ahead and keep moving down to the next page. Hang on just a second here. Minor subdivisions requirement revision. That was something that you all just took action on. So based on that action, we will go ahead and remove that from the final version of the work program. Also want to point out that the other significant text amendment that is still slated to happen this year is a text amendment on glare study requirements for solar farms within 5 miles of the airport. That's something that was brought to us by airport staff, and we're still on track to bring that to you in the spring. If we could keep going down, these next items are for the Historic Resources Commission, which obviously has its own approval authority. Then there's a section on the Public Art Commission, which has its own approving structure. If we can just keep going. Keep going to the next page. Next page. Okay, hang on right here. And one thing that I'd like to point out on this page, there was an item, development of a curriculum for departmental interns. You all may recall that we talked about last summer that we were going to try and get some interns from local area colleges, particularly students who maybe haven't been as exposed to planning careers in the past, or non-traditional students who are interested in the planning field, and again, try and get them exposure to these topics. We've been working with local colleges. We've been working with Winston-Salem State, NC-A&T, and various others. We've also talked to Appalachian State and East Carolina University, and we've kind of got some ideas about this, but we were holding off until a new planning director was appointed to make a final decision on that program, because again, we're expecting the planning director would kind of have a strong role in providing that leadership for those students as they're learning and getting exposed to the field. So with that being said, those were kind of the items that I thought were particularly interesting or meaty for the board to chew on. Certainly, I'm glad to talk about any other items that board members have questions on. I guess at this point, I'll leave you with two choices. If the board is comfortable, you can accept this work program update today. If you feel like you need to go through this document any further at your own leisure or ask additional questions, it could be accepted at our February public hearing meeting.
I know historically, at least the last couple of years, some members of the board, we've wanted to kind of review it and see if anything came up. Do you all want to do that again? Or are you ready to, no board action required? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I've got some responses that I would like to offer at whatever the appropriate time would be.
Okay. So how about we go back and we kind of look over it again, and if there are any specific questions such as Mr. Stillman,
Okay.
get those over to staff, and staff can respond via email or directly to each planning board member.
So should I just email you, Kurt, with the CC to the board members?
That would be correct, Mr. Steelman. I'll be glad to follow up with you.
Happy to. Thank you. And it's Jack.
Thank you. Giving honor to whom honor is due, sir.
Most people
right,
that call me Mr. Steelman, I owe money to.
All right, well, that concludes item 3. So now we would go into item 4.
Chairman, just a debrief of the public hearing meeting of January 13th. If there are any issues that anyone wants to discuss.
I just wanted to thank you, Chris, and Amy in particular for the work that they did at the public forum the other night. I think there were about 70 different questions from people, and there were 4 city council members that attended as well. So you were doing a lot of educating.
7 actually, yeah.
7. So it really did play a role in educating people, and there were a lot of people trying to figure out exactly what was going on, and appreciate the work that Amy did in explicitly going through that detail. Thank you.
Definitely, I appreciate that. I do want to give Amy kudos, and I do have that under staff report. I was going to give everyone an update.
Oh, okay.
As far as what's happening. That's fine. As far as what's happening, what's happened since the public hearing on UDO CC 15 at council. So Are there other items, or are there any items from our last public hearing that was held 2 weeks ago? All right, seeing none, then I'll let that be the transition into the staff report. As Mr. Bryan did allude to, at the council meeting on January 3rd, council had held a public hearing on UDO CC 15, the accessory dwelling unit text amendment, and it was there were lots of good discussion. There were folks there for it, folks there against it. The planning board heard all those items, had some good robust discussion amongst themselves. There was a motion for approval and a second, and then during the discussion there was a substitute motion to continue the item for 1 month, to allow for a public informational session to be put on by planning board to provide the public with what they were requesting, which was additional time to review the ordinance, some additional time to have their questions answered. And ultimately that's what council approved. That's what they decided to do. So they continued the item to the February 7th city council meeting and asked staff to put together a public information session where we could, try to provide some education to anyone who was interested. It was kind of open-ended. There wasn't a lot of specificity to it, and I'm actually grateful for that. In light of COVID and the rise of the Omicron variant, obviously, in-person meeting is still difficult, and that's obviously the best way to try to have one of these sessions. But what we ended up doing was we looked at our platform, and we did actually have one webinar license, but it was a limited webinar license. Essentially with Zoom, you have lots of different levels, and essentially what we were able to do was we were able to upgrade our license to a webinar, which means that it's on Zoom, you have panelists and you have folks that are in attendance, and the folks that are in attendance aren't seen and they can't be heard, but they are able to utilize features such as chat and Q&A. And so that's the avenue we took, and we worked with the Winston Neighborhood Alliance, reached out to them as far as if they would mind polling, some of their members and discuss with their constituents and, their neighborhood organizations. We had 2 possible dates, which date would be preferable to them. And also if they would mind trying to coordinate, say, the top 15 or 20 questions that, that were out there, circulating. And that way we could try to incorporate those into our presentation. And that's what happened. They got us the information. They said that Tuesday the 25th would be the preferable date. So that's what we scheduled for 6 to 8. We worked with marketing and communications to push the information out as far as when that would be on social media channels, on the city's website. Marketing and communications did a video that was part of their push to kind of explain what ADUs were and why council was considering them. And anyway, at the end of the day, it was held on this past Tuesday night from 6 to 8. And when you count staff, council, and participants, I think the peak, there were about 115 to 120 unique people that were signed on to that. As Mr. Bryan alluded to, I did an introduction. Amy did about a 40 to 45 minute presentation, taking it from the basics to the specifics of the ordinance, answering, some of those Q&A, the most frequently asked questions that we had received, providing some scenarios. And then we ended with the Q&A session, and Kirk was the moderator, and we answered about 70 questions through that. And, at the end of the day, I came back on at the end. We promised everyone would be out 2 hours, and we actually hit the 70th question at 7:58. So I was able to wrap it up, and thanked everyone. Basically, I think, conveyed that I think everyone has the same sentiment, we want what's best for the city of Winston-Salem. We may not agree, what that is. We may not agree that this is the best ordinance, but council, staff, the citizens that participated all have the best interest in mind. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a decision left at the council as far as what that is. And then again, made sure everyone was aware of what was coming up on the 7th. And, we heard from council members, we've heard from planning board members today, we've heard from citizens on both sides of, I would say the aisle, some that are pro, some that are against or have some concerns. And they were all very appreciative of the ones that we've heard from of the session that we did. So I want to give kudos to Amy. She did, as she has done throughout this, a ton of work. And as you heard earlier on the work program, she's been doing other things too. But this has been consuming a lot of her life over the last 6 months. She did an excellent job. Kirk did a great job moderating. All of our staff did a great job in helping us out. We had to have graphics. We had to meet to brainstorm. So it truly was a team and a collaborative effort. So that's my first update.
Chris, could I just chime in for a second? Because
Yes,
I did also want to compliment Amy. I was very impressed with her presentation and with Kirk's very clear answers. Both Amy, Kirk, and you, all three of you did a wonderful job. I really appreciated in particular the visualizations, the scenarios, because I thought that was very helpful to me. There were things that I learned that I didn't know. And so I think that was really necessary and for the public to get that information, and they did, and you did a fantastic job delivering it to them. So I'd encourage you to think about that in the future too, especially the way that Amy went through the provisions and showed how they related to the current provisions and also the peer city provisions. I thought that was really, really well done.
Thank you. I agree. I like the way we did that. And I think that would probably will be a tool that we use going forward. I mean, I think a lot of times we take for granted that folks understand that, we're not looking at an ordinance solely in a vacuum, but that ordinance fits into all the other provisions in the 700+ page document that we have. So when someone hears 1,000 square feet, they don't realize that there are other limiting factors that are going to kind of stack on top of that would probably make it either less or is going to make you move it away from somewhere that's so close to a property line. But no, I appreciate that.
And, I don't know if the other board members know it, but from my understanding, the Winston-Salem Neighborhood Alliance has got a survey out. My understanding on that is there are about 270 people that have completed that survey about the ADU standards, representing about 58 neighborhoods in Winston-Salem. So there is a considerable interest in what is going on with ADUs across the breadth of Winston-Salem. So it's been worth the time to sort of search for that engagement from people.
The last thing I'll say on that item, and I actually forgot, and Mr. Brown reminded me there, because I thought he was going to say something else, but it actually reminded me that if you are interested in watching the YouTube video or seeing at least a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation, on the front page of the website, cityofws.org/planning, there is a news flash there. And if you click on that, it will take you to the page where it talks about accessory dwelling units. And we have the ordinance, the staff report, the presentation that Amy gave to council, the FAQ, the presentation that we gave this past Tuesday night, as well as a link to the 2-hour YouTube video. If anyone is so interested, probably would not encourage anyone, unless they're really bored or really want to know about ADUs, to watch the entire 2 hours. But I mean, it was a great presentation. So again, all that information is there, and so feel free to take advantage of that. And if anyone asks, point them in that direction as well. Another item under staff report, Kelly Bennett and the Public Art Commission, the installation of the second set of bus shelter public art should be being installed over the next month to two. All those have been approved by the Public Art Commission. The contracts have been let, so you should start seeing some more public art installations in various bus stops around town. I have one more item and then a couple staffing things. I believe an email was sent out earlier that planning board received. We sent it out to a lot of different folks, but I believe this was that we sent an email out to the planning board with the development dashboard for Q4 of 2021. And that's kind of the year in review. The final quarter report is always the year in review. And I believe we'll probably have Steve give a kind of go over that report at either your February or March work session. But just high level, our previous high year in permitted value of construction permits that were issued since we've been doing the quarterly development dashboard was 2018, which had a constructed value of $678 million when you look at new commercial renovations and upfits, new residential, and any residential modifications. In 2021, we did $1.1 billion. So we were, $325 million higher than, or $425 million higher than we had been in any year in the past. So it just shows how busy the inspection side of the house has been. And of course, some of that, is also on the planning side of the house if they have to get a rezoning. One of the big projects that's under construction right now that affects that number came through planning board, the large project out on Wahlberg Road that Linville team brought through, and that they are finishing up a 600,000+ square foot warehouse for Ardall. Anyway, those are just, that's just one example of that. But like I said, Steve will go over that at a future meeting, but I did want to make sure I pointed that out to the planning board. So since you had seen it, I thought it was important to note. Couple staffing things. I believe it was announced at the last planning board meeting, but Beth has now transitioned to utilities. Beth is the senior administrative assistant in utilities, and so she is no longer with us. She will probably still do a few things for us moving forward, but if you need to get in touch with an administrative person, please contact Tara. Since Beth is not here, hopefully we'll be hiring her replacement soon, but don't have any update on that. I do have an update to let you know that we have hired Gary Roberts' replacement. We have hired a gentleman who has over 20 years of experience in local government, and his name is Mark Allred, and he's coming to us from Trinity. But he's a native of this area, the Triad, and we look forward to him coming in. He'll be starting in our department on the 7th. So as such, he won't have any items before you at the February meeting, but he will be on the meeting and we will introduce him at that point. And with that, that's all I have for staff report.
All right. Thank you so very much. And again, Amy and Kirk and Chris and everyone else who played instrumental part in pulling that off. Thank you so very much. It's much appreciated, and to hear planning board members also echoing who were on that Zoom call, really appreciated. Hopefully this council members found it worthwhile also. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Let's have a motion to adjourn.
Second? All right. You all have a positive evening.
All right.
And enjoy the snow
everyone.
Friday.
All right. Thank you all.